And tragic to the beautiful and serene. Last month, Cairo's Todd Pottinger and photographer Brian Miller traveled to that war-torn country and returned with stories of hope and renewal. Tonight, part one of an 8-part series entitled A New Vietnam.
Today, Vietnam is a country, not a war. If you want to understand where Vietnam is today, forget everything you know.
First thing out, you got a cougar.
If you can put aside these images, the pain and suffering and death, the colossal failure of U.S. foreign policy, you will do what the Vietnamese have done for the last 20 years. Although the Vietnamese people may never forget the horror visited upon their country, today, Vietnam is filled with the images of forgiveness. You may not believe it at first. How can these people let go of the past? Where is the anger? And why are these people smiling at Americans of all people? The truth is, the same indomitable spirit that repelled invaders for thousands of years, including the most powerful country on earth, that same spirit is now channeled into rebuilding and moving on. And that's why businesses from Taiwan, Japan, and Australia, and lately Washington State, are scrambling to get into Vietnam to capitalize on some of the cheapest, hardest working labor in the world. That's why Vietnam's tourism market is booming. And that is why Vietnam has one of the fastest growing economies in the world. But even though the war is long over, Vietnam is still undeniably a third world country. There's a lot of ground to make up, and Vietnam's people are still suffering. Hundreds of Vietnamese babies are abandoned every year by mothers too poor to care for them. Thousands of street children work 12-hour days hawking souvenirs. War survivors still struggle with an impossible burden. Yet this is what surprises the visitor to Vietnam. The war is over, and Vietnam is starting to walk on its own, beginning to develop an identity beyond the one forged by necessity and battle. And the lesson in Vietnam today is, if we can't forget, perhaps we can forgive. Because today, Vietnam is a country, not a war. Todd Pottinger, Cairo News, Vietnam.
Tomorrow night on Cairo News at 10, our Vietnam series continues with a powerful story of a local woman's reunion with her mother in Vietnam 20 years after the war.
Now tonight in our ID7 report, a different legacy of the Vietnam War. The families separated by the chaos, never to see each other again. But tonight we're joining a woman from Renton on her trip to Vietnam to find the mother she hasn't seen for 20 years. In this ID7 report, Cairo's Todd Pottinger takes you along just one of the emotional reunion stories coming out of A New Vietnam.
This was the day that she arrived in Bellevue. Just a really cute little happy girl, just really eager about life. She just kind of twinkles.
EMMY-winning was 13 years old when Luella Calling and her husband Gorman took her in as a foster child from Vietnam.
We just felt like there was no one else that would take care of her if we didn't do it, and we were willing to try.
Like thousands of Vietnamese children adopted in the U.S., Mai is a survivor of those final days of the Vietnam War. In the spring of 1975, North Vietnamese forces overrun the South. In a matter of weeks capturing territory, American soldiers spent 20 years and more than 50,000 lives defending. And then finally, the fall of Saigon. Unimaginable chaos. Families scrambling to put their children on the last remaining U.S. military transports leaving the country. The day Saigon falls, April 30th, 1975, 13-year-old Mai Nguyen joins the exodus. She escapes in a helicopter flown by a family friend to an American ship waiting offshore. But Mai's mother stays behind. Mai was sure it would be the last time she would see her.
Very sad, and I cry a lot every night. Yeah, I said, well, for whatever it takes, I have to go see her.
Mai was forced to make a new life for herself in America, all the while determined to see her mother again.
That was essential for her. It was something that she missed and for so many years didn't know whether she was even alive.
Today I am lifting the trade embargo against Vietnam.
20 years after the war, President Clinton lifts the trade embargo and later renews diplomatic ties to Vietnam, giving hope to hundreds of thousands of expatriates separated from their families by the war. 1 month later, 31-year-old My Win was on her way back home. She had finally located her mother.
Now I'm still kind of emotional to see her, and it's exciting for me.
In those 20 years in America, her life had undergone incredible change. Mai had married and had a son, Benjamin, who joined her on her trip back home. And in those 20 years, the Vietnam Mai had known had changed too. Only in recent years had the walls around Vietnam started to come down, allowing families like Mai's to reunite.
It's exciting, I mean, it's kind of feel, like warm inside you. You say, oh, you come back to your home and see your people, your country.
Mai had only spoken to her mother twice on the phone. This would be their first face-to-face meeting since she left Saigon. Does it seem like 20 years?
No, for me, no. It doesn't seem like 20 years, but when you're thinking, back, yeah, it seems like long.
But mixed in with her anticipation, Mai knows the trauma of separation had kept her mother incapacitated with depression for years. Only recently, and especially since hearing from Mai, has her mother begun to recover. In this Saigon suburb, Mai's old neighborhood, her mother is staying with a cousin.
You're gonna see Grandma.
This reunion, these two faces show the cost of war. A mother and daughter once torn from each other, now rebuilding their bond. And as Mai and her mother rediscovered each other, we spoke to Mai's brother Eddie, who helped find their mother in Vietnam.
Just like winning a lotto, rent price, rent price.
So he's very happy. Yeah, I'm the youngest one in the family, and I'm very close to my mom. So I think she missed my sister and my brother too, but she always missed me the most, because we're very close.
The way Mai's brother Eddie describes it, the people of Vietnam were caught in a hurricane. And now, finally, the storm is over. Todd Pottinger, Cairo News, Bien Hoa, Vietnam.
It's an incredible story, so sad, but what a happy ending to find one another. Well, from the sublime to the ridiculous, Peter McNeely in kind of some hot water, I guess.
Peter's
tonight.
back in the news, he's a fine fighter. He's a fine athlete, as you know. He can sweat with the best of them,
right?
I'll tell you right now. It's his character we wonder about. He got himself in a little scrape. We're going to tell you what Peter is up to or down to when we come back in sports in a minute.
Fastest growing tourism markets in the world. Cairo's Todd Pottinger gives us a tourist's eye view of that Southeast Asian nation in the latest part of his series, A New Vietnam.
5 hours northeast of Hanoi, Ha Long Bay is one of Vietnam's top tourist destinations. It is a place shrouded in ancient myths. Fishermen here believe a mysterious sea monster called a Tarrasque lives beneath the surface of the bay's emerald green waters. Yet another sea creature is credited with creating Ha Long Bay.
The word Ha Long literally means descending dragon. And if you believe the ancient Vietnamese legend, a giant dragon dropped down from the mountains here, jumped into Ha Long Bay, thrashed about, and created the islands that are its trademark.
For centuries, pirates and smugglers have used Ha Long's 3,000 chalk islands to hide. The 1992 French film Indochine used Ha Long as the setting where two young lovers sail away to escape the long arm of French law. Today, for $20 an hour, you can hire a tour boat to drift around and even under the islands. Throughout Vietnam, you will see scenes that will likely change your mind about this country. If you can survive the roads, where travel can best be described as a real-life roller coaster, bouncing from pothole to pothole. Finally freed from the burden of war, the people of Vietnam are opening up to the rest of the world and to tourists. But that doesn't mean Vietnam is ready to forget. One of the prime tourist destinations in the capital of Hanoi is this war museum, packed with captured U.S. war materiel. A Soviet SAM missile, the same missile that shot down dozens of American B-52s, now reigns over a row of captured American bombs. An entire courtyard displays the scraps of the war. And just off that courtyard, a renowned Vietnamese musical troupe entertains museum visitors. The Vietnamese may never forget, but they seem more willing to forgive than you can imagine. In Ha Long Bay, in a hidden cove, you can meet Vietnamese fishermen and their families, witnessing a culture that has remained relatively unchanged for 6,000 years. Families rarely leave their boats for anything. This family's visiting a floating convenience store. But it is faith that brings the fishermen ashore to visit the Buddhist shrines carved into the islands honoring their ancestors. This home is the community shrine, where Bui Hui Kai and his family live. Their 4 pigs obviously consider themselves part of the family. Inside the family home on the ground floor, Bui prays to the shrine honoring his late uncle, a fisherman who spent his life on the water. And the top floor, overlooking the cove, is the shrine honoring God. It is difficult to imagine a more serene view, the home to thousands of fishermen over the centuries, and now a place that welcomes the new faces from the West.
Goodbye.
Todd Pottinger, Cairo News, Ha Long Bay, Vietnam.
Tonight on Cairo News at 10, high-tech piracy in Vietnam. Find out how we all end up paying for counterfeit software. It's happening as fast as they can download it in Vietnam. Every day, it seems, we hear of yet another spectacular high-tech development in the computer world.
But the fact is, high-tech pirates in Vietnam are counterfeiting those new products even before you can buy them here. In tonight's ID7 segment, Cairo's Todd Pottinger takes you all the way to Vietnam, the new Vietnam, on the counterfeiting trail.
It was hailed as a marketing miracle. The launch of Microsoft Windows 95 this summer captured the world's attention like no other product in history. And Microsoft's Bill Gates was the miracle worker, capitalizing on the multimedia hype with a product critics said was not quite as revolutionary as the promos claimed.
Here it is, Windows 95!
Consumers drowned out those critics as Microsoft racked up millions in sales literally overnight. But in Asia, the launch of Windows 95 was old news to anyone with a computer. Months before Bill Gates wowed the world, computer pirates had been copying and selling test versions of Windows 95 as fast as their computers could download. This store in Saigon sells nothing but pirated software, some of it smuggled from China, some of it smuggled in from Vietnamese relatives in America. And that copy of Windows 95 that sells for $80 to $90 here in the U.S. can be bought in Vietnam for 20 cents.
You have Windows 95 here.
We have everything.
The software bargains on the shelf in Saigon surprised even Microsoft's lead anti-piracy attorney.
Microsoft 95, cranking it out, selling it for 20 cents.
Wow.
Dave Curtis coordinates Microsoft's effort to stop counterfeiting of software that takes years and millions of dollars to develop.
Protecting this kind of work, intellectual property, is in the long term in the best interest of every economy.
But no economy is immune to this high-tech piracy, a $15 billion illegal industry worldwide. Piracy rates range from 35% in the United States to Canada's 58%, to places like Vietnam, where 98% of all software used is pirated. In fact, there's only a handful of countries where the piracy rate is below 50%. In Vietnam, the owner of this shop says he's driven not only by the profit motive, but by the need to help his country.
We know it's illegal, but it's just like a family you share to your brothers.
Microsoft is working in countries like Vietnam to convince them to crack down on counterfeiters.
When the piracy rate's 98 or 99%, I mean, Microsoft will survive, I think, but that can be pretty devastating for a Vietnamese software developer. So, I mean, that's the kind of argument that I would make.
But the shop owner in Vietnam says he'll never copy his own countrymen's software. He says a coin has two sides. His business may be illegal, but his people can't yet afford the software they desperately need to develop. And so the software giants like Bill Gates become the unwitting donors to people on the other side of the world who are too busy trying to catch up to notice or care what they're doing is wrong. But it's estimated that if all this high-tech piracy all over the world stopped, the software industry's revenues would immediately double. Todd Pottinger, Cairo News.
And tomorrow night, as we continue our series from Vietnam, we'll hear the story of a Bellevue woman who has decided to add to her family by adopting a child from Vietnam. Many American families are doing the same, and we'll have that story for you tomorrow night at 10 o'clock on Cairo News. Steve?
Let's go back to computers for a moment. The richest man in the world was in Las Vegas today.
This is Cairo News.
Today, 20 years after the Vietnam War, one woman is saving the lives of thousands of Vietnamese children.
A Cairo News team recently traveled to Vietnam for a special series of reports. Tonight, the children saved by the Christina Noble Foundation in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam.
It is tonight's installment of A New Vietnam, and Cairo's Todd Pottinger has the story.
From the chaos of Saigon, a city of 6 million people. From the villages of Vietnam, from families scraping back from the horrors of centuries of war. From the streets of this wounded country come the faces of the children. Their lives once hanging from the thinnest of threads.
This is a picture of baby Bear when she first arrived on our doorsteps about 4 months ago, 4.5 months ago. We were informed that she was thrown away in a dustbin.
And this is baby Bear 4 months later, the same child in that picture, a child left for dead in a garbage dump by parents too poor to care for her.
Was there a time that you thought that she wouldn't make it?
Oh yeah, I think one of the main things, what attracted me to Bear was her eyes. They were almost saying, why did this happen to me? And what have I done? They were very, very, very solemn looking eyes, very sad.
Word of this place is spread throughout Vietnam.
This little girl, her parents are dying, both dying from cancer. Now they traveled on foot about 300 to 400 kilometers to come to Saigon, and they were looking for the blonde lady who saves the children.
The blonde lady is Christina Noble, an Irish woman from England who started her foundation 7 years ago with nothing but her passion to serve. Inspired by one of the most horrifying pictures of the Vietnam War, the girl burned by the napalm dropped by American jets, the symbol of children caught in the crossfire. After she saw this, Christina Noble knew she had to come to Vietnam.
She's like a locomotive. You can't stop her. She breathes and acts every day of her life for what she believes in. And because of those achievements, then I decided, and my sister decided, that it's time to give something back to our mother. Let's go and support her work.
Christina's son, Nick Pistola, manages the foundation. During our visit in September, his mother was out of the country fundraising for the children. In 7 years here, the Christina Noble Foundation has saved the lives of 40,000 Vietnamese children, lives nearly lost to poverty or disease or neglect. This little girl, just like baby Bear, was also found abandoned.
You're smiling for me.
This boy, little Val, was found in a garbage can. And while such stories are so difficult to fathom, they are commonplace here. As Vietnam rushes to catch up to the rest of the world, families are being displaced by development, children are being left behind. New casualties in a war of hunger and disease and neglect, in a society reaching for a living standard the Western world takes for granted. The foundation saves the children with this 24-hour intensive care unit, one caregiver for every 2 babies. The 5 infants here were all brought in a few days earlier from the Mekong Delta south of Saigon.
You're jealous, huh?
The children who graduate from intensive care move upstairs, but often the saving of a life is just the beginning. Many of the children still have profound behavioral problems brought on by malnutrition. The foundation has in-house social workers who treat the children, but every day the staff here sees the healing power of love and hope.
Surely it just comes down to love and the basic needs that a child has the right to have, which is security, a roof over their heads, food in their bellies, and some love.
Though Vietnam claims a high literacy rate, many families cannot afford to send their children to school. So the foundation also provides a government-accredited school, rotating 240 children 6 days a week in this classroom.
The children sometimes would have felt guilty about coming to school because instead of being in the lesson, they can be out on the streets selling chewing gum, shoe shine, subsidising income to feed the family, the younger brothers and sisters. So what we do, as well as educating the children, we provide them with food and a little bit of pocket money so they don't feel as guilty. They can put food in their bellies and they can take some money home to their families.
The foundation depends entirely on donations from corporations and individuals around the world.
There's nothing saintly about saving children. It's within our nature to do good. That's what life is about. It's about saving and enhancing those less fortunate than yourselves.
When the children are well enough and old enough, they're placed in secure homes, either with family members or adopted out of the country.
Whatever happens, at the end of the day, she will not be put into an environment that will harm her in any way. And that's just the policy that we have. It's the policy that we uphold. And it's the policy that we believe in.
The foundation is now raising money for a major addition that will double capacity at its clinic. The people who work here consider this place an investment in Vietnam's future.
I mean, life does mean something. It means a hell of a lot. I believe in if you do something good, and there's a saying over here, if you plant a good seed and you nurture that seed, a beautiful flower will grow.
Todd, Pottinger, Cairo News, Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam.
There is a way for you to help. The Noble Foundation welcomes your donations. You can call our Cairo information line for the address where you can send your donation. There you see the number on your screen, 728-8558.
5 students have homework tonight for the first time in weeks.
Coming up, we'll take a closer look at the end of the longest teacher strike in state history.
Finding children to adopt children in need of homes in Vietnam. Tonight in our ID7 segment, Todd Pottinger and photographer Brian Miller take you to the new Vietnam for one family's story.
Just as generations before them absorbed the shock of war, Vietnam's children are still caught in the middle as its people struggle to catch up to the rest of the world. Social workers in Vietnam say hundreds of orphans are found abandoned every year in Vietnam by parents too poor to care for them, and most of those children do not survive. Others are routinely exploited as child labor. Though not orphans, these children make up a large part of this construction crew building a Japanese underwear factory in Ho Chi Minh City. But for a few of Vietnam's children, there is a way out. Adoption has literally saved their lives.
It just cracks me up. Come here.
His American name, Cameron Kruger. His mother, Carrie, adopted him last February from Vietnam.
They are absolutely the most wonderful gifts you could ever hope for in your life. And I really encourage people to pursue it. I hope that it happens more.
Cameron came from a village near Da Nang in central Vietnam. His unmarried mother was too poor to care for him. An adoption agency based in Maine helped Carrie find Cameron, one of a handful of agencies that now see Vietnam as an untapped reservoir of available children for American parents.
Vietnam is working with single women. They are working with couples regardless of their age. So for a lot of people, being over 40 is an obstacle, but in Vietnam that would not be an obstacle. Submitted my paperwork, got a referral a couple months later. 2 months later, he was here. Total process, 7 months. So easier than a pregnancy.
In Bangkok, Thailand, the same agency that found Cameron for Carrie is taking these Vietnamese children to their new adoptive families in America. This 5-year-old girl is going to Indiana. This boy is on his way to a new home in Montana. The babies, 2 of them, are going to Maine. Joy Degenhart, herself once a Vietnamese orphan, now organizes adoptions in Vietnam.
I feel great. I think it's a feeling that nobody can ever imagine unless they are an orphan child and they go back and do the same thing like what I'm doing.
With Joy on this trip from Vietnam to America, Vietnamese officials who want to see where the orphans are placed. This man is the vice chairman of one of Vietnam's provinces who says, "I think we should close the past and open a new page of history. And for the children adopted in America, they should have a happy and a better future."
Why did you take the picture?
But with any case involving children and adoptive parents, some of them desperate, the potential for problems exists.
When they come over as an individual, they're very desperate for a child. They would do anything for a child.
Payoffs, corruption.
Exactly.
That's why adoption advocates say parents should use an agency rather than trying to adopt in Vietnam on their own. And what about those who say Americans should not raid the nurseries of another country?
I would say that if there were enough families in Vietnam to raise these kids, that it wouldn't be appropriate for us to go over and take them. So I don't feel like I'm robbing their nurseries for these kids, because they just wouldn't have anyone otherwise.
Okay, get ready for baby brother.
Carrie Kruger felt so strongly about adoption, she adopted twice. Claire came from China 3 years ago.
Hold them tight.
I would tell my children, you're a Vietnamese American, you're a Chinese American, and keep that alive for them.
Arms around. Ready?
I do reflect sometimes on what they would have had if they hadn't have been able to come over here. Not just these 2, but all of the children that are adopted and come over here.
Perhaps Cameron and Claire are 2 little examples of a new kind of diplomacy, from country to country, from mother to child.
It's about these kids and the need for these kids to have a home and to have love and to have parents.
Todd Pottinger, Cairo News.
Amazing story. Tomorrow night at 10 on Cairo News, the story of a Seattle doctor who has helped 6,000 Vietnamese war victims walk. Another amazing story of mercy and compassion right here at 10 tomorrow night. Just as the Columbia River is vital to the Northwest, the Mekong River is the lifeline of Southeast Asia.
But as Vietnam and other countries that depend on the Mekong struggle to develop, the river and its people are threatened. Cairo's Todd Pottinger and photographer Brian Miller bring us this story, another installment of A New Vietnam.
Sunrise on the Mekong Delta, south of Saigon, a thriving part of the world that could not survive without this river, the Mekong, Vietnam's lifeline. Starting at 15,000 feet in China's Tibetan mountains, the Mekong flows for more than 2,600 miles through 6 countries, finally reaching Vietnam before emptying into the South China Sea. For thousands of years, the Mekong has fed its people, given up its fish, flooded its rice fields. The harvest even sells on the river in this floating market 150 miles south of Saigon. Here you can buy whatever you need, from fresh banana cakes to oranges to cucumbers, and never leave your boat. Through centuries of war, the Mekong's lush jungles have also hidden the enemy. The river is perhaps best known for the defoliants called Agent Orange that American forces sprayed to expose North Vietnam soldiers. Despite dumping 11 million gallons of the chemicals, the same volume as the Exxon Valdez oil spill, the American war strategy failed. The North Vietnamese won, and the Mekong flows on. So does the debate over whether or not Agent Orange has had any lasting environmental effect at all on the Delta.
It's been more than 20 years since the U.S. military sprayed Agent Orange on hundreds of canals like this one in the Mekong River Delta. But today, there are new concerns about this river and its future.
Southeast Asia is home to the fastest growing economies in the world, countries desperate to catch up. And the 6 Asian nations that own a piece of the Mekong are looking to the river for help. They're all planning billions of dollars in massive dam and irrigation projects. Laos alone wants to build 58 separate dams on the Mekong. The question now asked by those whose lives depend on this river, what will happen to us? Environmentalists say the Mekong's developers must look to the Western world for their lessons. It was hydroelectric dams sold as progress that devastated the Columbia River's salmon runs, cutting the world's largest annual migration of salmon by 70%.
We consider the Mekong River water is like an elixir of life.
An elixir?
Yes. We were born here and we do everything in the water.
Zovan Tuan is an environmental scientist at Kuntur University in the middle of the Delta.
It has been threatened by man-made projects, man-made ideas, and most of these man-made ideas have been shaped up by the leaders or by the planners without much consultation with the users, as is the farmers.
The people of the Mekong fear development will destroy their fragile ecosystem, a balance perfected through the centuries. Damming the river's flow could bring in crop-killing salt water from the South China Sea. Flooding the Mekong to boost agriculture could wipe out some of the 1,000 species of fish in the river.
If we don't stop, or we don't regulate this, or if we don't develop sustainably, I think we will come to the point that we will lose a lot of land, a lot of money, and we will be bankrupt.
For now, Tuan says the Mekong's strong flushing action saves it from pollution, but the plans by the river-owning countries could increase that threat. And with no public hearings in communist Vietnam, no environmental impact statements, who will speak for the Mekong and the millions of people who live on it?
I think my greatest concern is for the people here.
Patricia Cummings is an environmental lawyer who recently moved to the Mekong Delta from San Rafael, California. Cummings spent much of her college years protesting the Vietnam War. Now she has a new cause.
We're not at war with these people, and now is an opportunity to come together in a way that's meaningful for the present time.
She started the Mekong River Foundation, dedicated to sounding the alarm around the world about threats to the river.
I think the environmental community is asking the River Commission and the agencies, the big UN, ADB, Asian Development Bank, World Bank, the aid community that's funding these things to take another look at this and see if, in fact, the millions of people who live on this watershed are going to be benefited by it, and whether Bangkok needs that electricity from that source or are there other sources.
The source of life here is the river. Many families in the Delta spend nearly their entire lives on or in the water. It is these images that drove Patricia Cummings to try to save the treasure that is the Mekong.
Everything goes in the river. Everything from whatever these people in the boats throw out of their boat to all the industrial waste upstream there. There's a detergent manufacturing plant, and beyond that there's a pesticide plant. There's no waste controls for these things. Everything goes into the river. You know what environmental laws are? They're an agreement between people in a society that I'm not going to take advantage of you. I'm not going to do something and make my money and make you unhealthy.
And as the world takes more from the Mekong, asks the river to make good on its promises, this mother of waters continues to care for its family. The question is, for how long? Todd Pottinger, Cairo News, the Mekong Delta, Vietnam.
Todd Pottinger, Brian Miller. Tonight at 10 on Cairo News, meet a Seattle doctor who's helped 6,000 Vietnamese war victims walk. Watch this inspirational story tonight at 10, right here on Cairo.
And still ahead, remembering a pioneer in Seattle politics.
Sam Smith has passed away, and we'll look back at his many contributions to the community.
Dr. Ernest Burgess might not be a household name to you,
but the Seattle orthopedic surgeon is well known in Vietnam as the doctor who helps people walk again. The devastation of the war in Vietnam has left more than 200,000 Vietnamese people without limbs. But Dr. Burgess has taken his mission of mercy to a country filled with need. Tonight in our Cairo ID7 report, Todd Pottinger and photographer Brian Miller take us to the new Vietnam for the doctor's story.
All right, give me some cover. Here, get him back here if you can. Can you move him?
This is a face thousands of battlefield victims have seen for more than 50 years.
Okay, try and bring him back here. Remember to stop the bleeding.
As a young Army surgeon, Dr. Ernest Burgess began performing amputations in the battlefields of World War II. He would return to Korea and then Vietnam. And in all the suffering and the saving of lives, the thousands of amputations, the doctor came to believe there must be a better way to restore the quality of life for his patients after war.
This book is called The Face of Mercy.
When we met Dr. Burgess in September, he showed us one of his favorite books.
It just happens to be a photographic documentation of medicine, of physicians in wars dating clear back to the Roman wars. Sherman described it quite effectively when he said, "War is hell."
After his wars, Dr. Burgess helped pioneer the Seattle foot, a revolutionary prosthetic limb. Lightweight and durable, the Seattle foot has become one of the most commonly used artificial limbs in the country. But it would be another country, a place burned into America's collective memory, where the doctor would bring his mercy.
And they said, as near as they could tell, there were about 200,000 amputees in Vietnam amputees coming out of our war over there. All need no money, classical situation. We lost around 50,000 people in the Vietnam War. The Vietnamese lost 1 million, and they're a third the population we are. So war works both ways.
Despite political pressure at home and communist red tape in Vietnam, 7 years ago, Dr. Burgess went back to Vietnam to set up a prosthetic research foundation clinic in Hanoi. Now, 6 days a week, the clinic staff measures amputees for new limbs. This man has waited since 1969, when an American bomb in Laos took his left leg. 10 years later, this man lost his leg to a mortar rocket in Vietnam's border war with China.
Rotate cast to anterior.
In what was a first for the entire Third World, Dr. Burgess imported computer-aided design techniques to Vietnam. The entire process takes just a few hours. In 7 years, the clinic founded by Dr. Burgess has fitted 6,000 Vietnamese amputees with new limbs.
It's like providing glasses for somebody who can't see.
Van Phung Luan lost part of his right leg in what he calls the War of Liberation against the French 40 years ago. He says Dr. Burgess is a kind man who gave him another chance. And Luan says he does not feel disabled now. The truth is, this lightweight, durable limb from Seattle helped Luan win a world ping pong championship in China last year. Throughout Vietnam now, you can find the doctor's work. He's even designed a prosthesis that rice farmers can use in the fields, a limb that won't rust or break down in the high humidity.
It's about people. That's what it's about. As I was saying, it's been very satisfying to me. So we'll see what comes of it.
The horrors of war have made this man humble. Despite a stroke in the twilight of his career dedicated to helping others walk, the 84-year-old doctor says his work will continue, just as the need will continue.
It's paradise won and paradise lost. There's the good and the bad. And that's been with us forever, and it'll continue, I'm sure. This is an attempt, this work we're doing is an attempt to accentuate the good, to salvage what one can out of what is a horrible human experience. It's been a very, very gratifying thing for me.
Dr. Ernest Burgess, his face is the face of mercy. Todd Pottinger, Cairo News.
And an inspirational update now on Dr. Burgess's condition. After his stroke, he's walking again and ready to get back to work after just celebrating his 84th birthday.
In Israel, the man who admitted killing Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin today reenacted